Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We are just waiting for a few more people to join before we can get started. If you have any questions throughout the session, please don't hesitate to drop them in the chat on the right-hand side, and we will get going in just a couple of minutes. Hi, Teja. Thanks for joining. Dylan, I see you're in here as well. Just a reminder for all the participants, we're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. So please hang tight while we wait for the rest of our attendees to join. Okay, I think we are just about ready to get started. So thanks everyone for joining. You should be able to see a chat function on the right-hand side of your screen. There is a public version of that, so we ought to be able to see any questions that you have. But we are very excited to get started. I'll introduce myself quickly, and then we have two absolute rockstar Rockerboxers, double verifiers, joining me here today on the webinar, and I'll let them introduce themselves. So my name is Will Burgess. I am the head of professional services here at Rockerbox Double Verify. I joined Rockerbox 2 years ago. I work with a great number of our customers, our clients. Hopefully some of them are here on the webinar today. And my remit covers all of the managed services as well as all of the consulting and strategic advice that we have here at the organization. And Dylan, why don't I pass it over to you and let you introduce yourself?
Perfect. Yeah, so my name is Dylan. I am the Client's Insight Analyst. So I work under Will. So I primarily work with our incrementality testing, but we also put together projects like this. So the Rockerbox 2025 year in review and some BFCM work as well.
Cool. Hey all, my name is Tasia. I'm a director of customer success here at Rockerbox. I've been here for a little over 4 years, so hopefully I've worked with a few of you all and hope to work with a few of you in the future. I'm excited for this webinar.
Fantastic. Thanks both. Okay. So let's get straight into it. We're going to have 3 sections to this presentation, which we'll go through one at a time. The first one, we're going to be having a quick look back at BFCM. I expect for many of the people on this webinar, that was an extremely hectic time of year, hopefully successful for everyone, but obviously extremely busy as well. And we have a few trends and different insights that we wanted to cover from that, just to show you the things that we had seen coming out of that time period. Then we'll get into 2025 full year. So we have a few trends in media that we've seen from the data we collect from our customers that we wanted to share with you all. And then very, very last but not least, we have efficiency benchmarks. And that will be the shortest section, but I think pretty interesting for everybody on this call. So without further ado, let's jump straight into BFCM. And one of the things that we like to look at is to understand what is the trend in the actual level of spend through time, especially in BFCM? So it won't come as a surprise to anyone on this call that brands tend to spend a lot more on media over that holiday period than at other times. You can see that very clearly on the chart. But I'll let Dylan explain a little bit of what we saw specifically in 2025 and how that compared to prior years as well.
Yeah, so what we're finding that's interesting here is that we are seeing 2023 was a really big year, and 2024 was a bit smaller, and 2025 again was even smaller than that. So it could just be that advertisers are feeling a bit more cautious, or they have also could have learned that their own channels are really effective and are pushing for the promo and organic demand to do the heavy lifting instead of paying a bunch to get some extra advertising. And what we are seeing a lot too is also cost inflation during BFCM. So that could be another main driver of decreasing spend, not having it ramp up quite as much right during the BFCM time, and instead using the own channels and organic demand to drive a lot of lifting.
This fits nicely also year over year. What we're seeing from broader trends across customers, with 2025 really being focused on profitability, especially as brands pretend to mature and age. Those earlier years, especially for D2C or e-com heavy brands in 2023, 2022 even, were really driven by growth growth at any and all costs, especially coming out of COVID. Post-COVID now, it looks like as brands again mature, they're looking more for profitability, which helps explain some of that BFCM spend retreat.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I want to tie back what Teja you said to the last thing that Dylan said as well, which is that we have published a little bit of research in the past about cost inflation on a lot of the media platforms. And I think that kind of people seeing that cost inflation over BFCM tied with the need for greater efficiency really seems to be combining with just a little bit more caution in terms of how people allocate their media budgets. We're certainly seeing, in some instances, some advertisers end up paying, twice as much for advertising on the same channel just to get fewer impressions than they would have at some time of year, because obviously the cost scales dramatically, but the actual available inventory in advertising doesn't necessarily scale quite as much. So really important thing to watch out for as you're planning your promo budgets for next year. The next thing that we wanted to take a look at was to do with the media mix and the kinds of channels that were being spent on in BFCM in 2025 versus prior years. So again, Dylan, I'll pass it quickly over to you just to explain a little bit of what we were seeing.
Yeah, so what we're seeing from 2024 to 2025, we're seeing that the combined total of search and social is moving up a little bit. So you can see in 2024, it's about 58%, and now in 2025, it was 62%. So it's starting to climb back up towards where it was in 2023. Another thing that we are seeing is that affiliate is in 2024 and 2025, 8%, about double what it was back in 2023. And I think that's pretty the biggest points that I wanted to highlight. Will, is there anything you wanted to add on that?
No, I think that's a really good summary. Teja, I know that you're extremely close to a lot of our big spenders for BFCM. I don't know if there are specific kind of stories or trends that you were able to see from some of those conversations.
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of the trends that I've been seeing, especially across our bigger brands, especially brands that sell luxury or higher AOV items, is a lot of the spend actually coming earlier in the year. Brands are pushing earlier and earlier to capture that top of funnel demand. So pieces like linear TV, OTT, they're pushing up the brand awareness spend sometime like, let's say, late September, and then kind of pushing their users into that middle of funnel as we go through October, and then using like really efficient demand capture mechanisms in November, which helps explain that increase in share of search and social for 2025 as opposed to for 2023.
Yeah, that's actually a great transition to our next slide. So one of the things that we were looking at was what is the difference between how brands are spending during BFCM versus outside of BFCM. And so you can see a lot of those trends that you were mentioning just then, right? So that green bar in the middle there, TV, clearly a good chunk higher outside of BFCM versus within BFCM, while shopping and PMAX start to come in a lot more heavily during BFCM, specifically when you're trying to capture that demand that maybe you've seeded earlier in the year. So I think that's exactly right. Dylan, I don't know if you had a couple of hypotheses you wanted to share about the patterns in search and social. I know those are gigantic categories making up, over 60% of spend in total for both of these different columns here. But if there's anything else you wanted to add, let us know.
Yeah, so something that we found interesting is that search is declining. Typically, search is thought of as a little bit lower funnel than social, though it really varies. As Will mentioned, they're such big categories. So one reason why we thought that could be is because promo advertising on social can just be a lot more engaging than it can be on search. So search, just seeing the number 20% off isn't nearly as engaging as it can be on social, where you can make full graphics and it's just a lot more interesting. Another thing that we do see as well, as I mentioned, social and search are just such big channels that have both upper and mid and lower funnel. So we do see a shift from prospecting campaigns in social and other upper funnel campaigns throughout the rest of the year. We see that start to move more into the retargeting and some other lower funnel or mid funnel campaigns during BFCM.
Yeah, fantastic. Teja, you also mentioned kind of when brands were starting to spend and the importance of that. And this is an analysis that we have done a couple of years running now and is super, super interesting. So what we did was look at when brands began to spend, when did we see that first increase in their spend versus the sort of end of summer steady state, if you like, and what that meant for the excess profits that they were earning during BFCM specifically. So I think, Teja, your point that you made earlier about the importance of not waiting too late to start promoting your promotion, as it were, is absolutely important. Dylan, is there anything that you wanted to point out specifically on this page?
I don't think there's too much, just that really starting very early, before October 15th, as a lot of the bigger brands are now, is really the way to go. You can see it has a much bigger increase than even starting, October 15th to the 31st has 378% increase, which is great, obviously, but that's about the same as starting late or even last minute, about 308, 304. So very similar, whereas if you start even earlier, that is really effective.
Yeah.
This also dovetails nicely, Dylan, with your analysis earlier about how there's cost inflation, especially as we get closer to the BFCM period, especially trying to do like a big buy on something like OTT or linear will get really expensive the more we get into the holiday period, whereas buying earlier, like in September, October, is typically much more cost efficient.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I will note that behind this analysis, there's a lot of kind of assumptions being made. How do we define that spend lift? Are we using mean increases in profit versus median, that sort of thing? So depending on exactly how you slice this, there are a few differences in this, in the exact pattern of this chart. But what never goes away is the importance of starting a little bit early. If you leave it until the middle of November, you've definitely missed the boat in terms of being able to seed the demand for when your promotion actually arrives. So very important, I think, for everyone to think about as you get into planning for next year. Hopefully that's, for most of you, a long way out, but still never hurts to get started early. Okay, great. So that is what we have for BFCM specifically. Let's get started with some full year 2025 trends. And the first thing that we wanted to look at was actually a specific point of interest that we had from last year, which was TikTok. Very much a hot platform then and still a hot platform now, with a lot of interest from advertisers that are clients of ours. And Dylan, you unearthed a kind of interesting pattern, I think, here that you were going to talk about.
Yeah, so as Will mentioned, last year we found that TikTok spend was really dramatically increasing from 2023 through middle and towards the end of 2024. And then what we actually found is that trend starts to reverse. So you can see it goes from about 2.5% in January 2023, all the way up to right about 6%. And then after that, it starts to come back down. So what we're seeing is that a lot of brands have cooled on TikTok, and it's not going to be a major part of their media mix going forward. We suspect that's just because they're not finding good value. You see, TikTok ROAS has been across our brands consistently below 1. It reached 1 barely just for a minute, but obviously 1.0 ROAS is not typically going to be worth investing in.
Yeah, definitely. And across advertisers at Rockerbox, despite our being able to track both clicks and views for TikTok, we're still seeing that TikTok has high overlaps with other high impact bottom of funnel channels like organic search and branded search, which is sharing credit away from TikTok, making TikTok less efficient when you can get those same kind of overlaps driving efficiency from, let's say, a Facebook that already has wider scale and audience reach. The other part across brands that's making TikTok harder to scale is how fast you need to refresh your creative, right? TikTok being the fastest, like kind of, let's say creative goes stale the quickest in TikTok as opposed to something like Facebook, which means you have to have a large suite of assets for TikTok to continue that freshness and keep people engaged throughout the funnel, which makes it a little bit harder to scale, a lot easier for us to put, or for brands to just put that money in Facebook instead.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think it will be very interesting to look back on this in a year or two and see, have we just kind of reached the steady state of what is the right level of spend of your media budget to put into TikTok? Or is there going to be a kind of another lift as that platform evolves? I think when I think about Meta and all of the different products that Meta have, all of the different ways that you can spend on Meta and how gigantic that platform is, it kind of makes sense that it's so much bigger than TikTok, which is a bit more streamlined or a bit more niche these days. So I think this is not the end of the story here for TikTok by any means. I think we're going to see a bunch more movement, but definitely interesting to see that maybe that initial wave of enthusiasm has waned just a little bit, and we're about to enter kind of a next phase for the platform. Okay, the next one, a very, very frequent topic of conversation here at Rockerbox Double Verify is thinking about affiliate. And Dylan, tell us a little bit what you found when you were analyzing affiliate trends.
Yeah, so affiliate, we can see that the CPA on affiliate has been steadily climbing from 2023 all the way through the end of 2025. However, spend has also been steady or even climbing a little bit. That's just because the CPA, though it is climbing, is still relatively low. The biggest concern that we do have with affiliate whenever we see this is, and a question we get asked a lot actually for incrementality testing, is this really driving any incremental growth? There's a lot of different types of affiliate, and some of them, some of the publishers, they really do have it really is driving incremental growth. It really is effective use of the money. And sometimes you're just moving a customer who is already going to buy, you're just moving them through a different channel. So it definitely depends on which affiliate you're working with. And also each individual brand has very different stories with affiliate.
Yeah, great points. I think one of the things that's really interesting for us about affiliate is that it's one of those channels that is very, very easy to measure, but it's potentially quite difficult to measure very well. And so I think there's always that question of, not just are we capturing its effect, but are we really capturing it properly? And I think that's the biggest challenge for a lot of people. I think your point, Dylan, about the different flavors of affiliate, the different types of affiliate are absolutely spot on. There's just so much difference between a browser extension that gives you money off or rebates versus an actual recommendation site that gets kind of revenue from affiliate clicks. Those two things couldn't be more different, and their impact and effects couldn't be more different. So I think really important when you're planning media to think about those differently, just as how we advise all of our customers to think about, say, brand search and non-brand search very, very differently. They just don't act in the same way at all. Okay, next. We wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive into search. Like I said, search is a broad category, dominated by Google, obviously, but I think non-brand versus brand search, those operate in very, very different ways. Nevertheless, when we look at the overall scale, we are seeing some pretty interesting trends. So Dylan, tell us what you found, and then Tasia would love to hear kind of what you're seeing from different advertisers in this space as well.
Yeah, what we found that was really interesting is that you can see CPA has a very steady climb, and it's pretty significant. It's going all the way from 40 up to the 70 range, which is a very large growth in terms of CPA. Whereas ROAS is remaining relatively steady. It's hovering about 3.5 to start and gets down to, 3.2, 3.0, somewhere in that range. So very interesting to see it, an almost 100% increase and then a very small decline in ROAS. Typically, these two move very close together. So what that suggests that we're seeing is just some media cost inflation, and also potentially not advertisers, our clients are actually just making more money from each individual customer that they acquire, a higher average order value.
Yeah, definitely. As we mentioned a little bit earlier at the top of this call, as brands get more and more mature, one thing that we've started seeing more of is a lot more conquesting campaigns, which would drive that CPA up over time, especially for, let's say, like lower cost items or even luxury items as well. The longer you're in market, the more likely you are to get competitors in market that are doing heavy conquesting on campaigns, which will lead to those higher CPAs. Conversely, though, the customer base that you've built and continued to cater to will continue to purchase, based off like brand search, which is what helped boost that ROAS and keep that ROAS overall stable. The CPA inflation, I'd want to guess here, Dylan, is probably mostly coming from non-brand search or like net new customers, where repeat customers you kind of always expect to come back from organic email or brand search.
Yeah, great points. Okay, so next to, I guess, search, paid search, we often think about PMax, and PMax and Meta have really become kind of two very, very dominant channels. Obviously, the growth of PMax over the last few years has been one of the big stories in reallocation of media budgets. And we're seeing quite a lot of stability actually across PMax and Meta combined, from about 30 to 40%, but really very stable over the last 3 years. So it's really a gigantic proportion of media budgets when you think about it. But if we click a level deeper, we actually see some really, really interesting trends in the engagement on those two channels, specifically when it comes to click-through rates. So yeah, Dylan, let us know what you showed or what you saw when you were examining the click-through rates on these two channels.
Yeah, I think the bigger one obviously is Meta. Meta jumping up from click-through rate of just above 1.0 to almost 2.0. Huge. So it's been pretty consistent until 2025, when all of a sudden it just shot up. We think that this trend is actually occurring because of some new AI tooling that can allow for better targeting and improved optimization. You can see that the same trend does exist for PMax, but it is a bit more, I guess, a bit less extreme, a bit more muted. And so I think Meta is the one that really stands out, though PMax does show the same trend as well.
Yeah, I'd like to add that 2025 boost for Meta makes a lot of sense, especially because PMax came out first as a campaign type, which means Google had a lot of time to get that initial bump and then kind of stabilize their PMax performance, whereas Meta's came and was adopted a little bit later, 2024, early 2025. And the growth of, like, let's say Meta smart campaigns as well as PMax smart campaigns, the idea here is obviously it's the lowest lift possible for the brand to get that advertising out to the most amount of people, which is why we're seeing that fast growth for Meta. Similarly, I would expect as other platforms try to develop there's their version of like smart campaigns or PMax type campaigns, we'll see sharp CTR rises as those campaigns mature.
Yeah, great points. Yeah, I think the impact of AI on these platforms, on these tools, is really the big trend here. You know, the release of all of those tools into the ecosystem, allowing better targeting, better creative, better optimization, all of that stuff seems to be having a big impact on response. Obviously, you know, click-through rate, that's not necessarily what people are looking for on its own. Clicks don't pay the bills, revenue pay the bills. So you have to make sure that all of this is actually translating through into those effective campaigns, into revenue and conversions. But nevertheless, a really interesting trend that we saw. And then YouTube, we actually saw, in fact, the opposite, where the click-through rates on YouTube, that engagement just seems to be going down and down and down, especially since about the end of 2024 onwards. The trend is just undeniable. And I think, Tasia, you actually had specifically a couple of hypotheses about why this was and what you've seen here.
Yeah, definitely. The big one that I've seen across clients is just with Google pushing demand gen as the primary method to get YouTube across. It's become more and more obfuscated to figure out how to track YouTube engagement, which for Rockerbox, that means we're seeing less and less clicks from demand gen as they're prioritizing view-through engagements. which has been the big one for us, being not seeing YouTube click performance stabilize or even increase with the same rate as something like Meta, which we would say similarly should also be like within the same like engage or within the same like view through type engagement rate. So that's the big one from YouTube that we're seeing. I don't know. I think that's the main hypothesis we have on our side.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the big one. I know, personally from my experience, YouTube has become much more of a big screen experience for me rather than a little screen experience, and so it has for sure over the last year or two transitioned into a big screen, non-clickable environment, and I just think that we're seeing that in the data. There's obviously also been quite a lot in the press about just overall ad loads on YouTube, people getting a little bit more fatigued by the number of ads that they're seeing, the number of non-skippable ads, and so on and so forth. So there's been a lot of evolution to that platform, but very, very interesting to see that reflected here in the numbers too. And then lastly, in this section, we wanted to take a look at the way that different advertisers were spending based on the size of the brand. So by size of brand here, we mean what is their overall annual media budget. And there's clearly some differences between the media allocation between those different sizes of brand. So Dylan, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you found here specifically?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing, it can be summarized in two statements. First of all, bigger brands spend more on upper funnel, smaller brands spend more on lower funnel, right? So we can see that specifically with TV. TV, you can see it goes from about 2% of spend with our smaller brands all the way up to 12% for our larger brands. Whereas something more like affiliate, you can see affiliate, which is a lower funnel channel. It has 12% of spend for a lot of our smaller brands, and then it goes all the way down. It actually goes down pretty quickly to 5% for our $5 to $10 million spend customers. And then, sorry, go ahead, Teja.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say for smaller brands, that's also something that we see specifically because they use other channels to kind of do their brand cover. So for instance, an example with affiliate itself would be like when a brand advertises, let's say its product and it makes it into something like New York Times Wirecutter, that usually counts as a lot of brand air cover and has some overlaps with things like organic search and branded search, the same way you would expect something top of funnel like OTT or linear to perform.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's so interesting for me to be able to see the sort of story of brand evolution coming through in this chart, right? Whereas on the left, you've got your small brands, they're just starting. Everything that they do is incremental. They can really just spend in the bottom of the funnel. They don't have to worry about building that brand yet. So they're not in TV, they're not in CTV. We see a lot of that shopping, a lot of PMAX, a lot of social, a lot of search. But then, at Rockerbox, we get a lot of brands coming to us and saying, as I grow, as I mature, I've had to invest in these other channels. I'm struggling to measure them. I'm not being able to rely on my platform attribution. I want something deduplicated. I want to talk about testing. I want to talk about incrementality and MMM. And then you can really see how that would affect those much bigger brands who are there in TV and CTV and much more invested in the upper funnel. I see a question from Erica here in the chat. So let's just jump over to that real quick. Have we seen any notable standouts or call-outs from YouTube's affiliate launch back in 2024 until now? That's a great question. We didn't actually examine that specifically for this presentation, but that certainly is a good prompt. Erica, if you give us a couple of weeks, we'll take that away. We can see if we can dive into that and get you a couple of insights on that. But yeah, apologies, we didn't specifically look at that one for this presentation.
Anecdotally, I can say that we have not seen any notable standouts to date. The real reason for that is just because brands already tend to have a pretty strong affiliate program, either running through a partner like Rakuten or Pepper Jam, stuff like that, Pepper Jam or any other affiliate partnership, where YouTube partners don't seem to generate the same kind of revenue. The only place I've seen it generate revenue has been with smaller AOV purchases where like a YouTube creator links out in their shopping page, something like a $35, less than $100 purchase. But to date, nothing that's notable. Again, we'll come back to you in a few weeks with this.
Yeah, that's a great insight, Teja. I will say that in my experience, affiliate programs in general are quite sticky. the kind of the feel, the connection between that lever of spend and the lever of revenue feels so strong that once you're kind of embedded with a particular platform, a particular ecosystem, it's a little difficult to chop and change. So it doesn't surprise me too much that you haven't seen a lot of people shifting into YouTube affiliate for that reason, right? If you have an affiliate setup that works for you, then my guess is that most people would just stick with that as it is. Okay, great. If anyone else in the audience does have any other questions, please don't hesitate to drop them in. All right, we're getting into our last sections. We just have a couple more slides in here, and then we will take any final questions and wrap up. But the first set of benchmarks, this is CPA and ROAS by year, by the size of the brand, the size of the advertiser. And the trends here are not super strong, but Dylan, if you have anything that you want to call out on this page, don't hesitate to say so.
Yeah, I think that the first trend is actually very similar to what we were just talking about, which is that as you scale up as a brand, you do need to put more money into potentially less incremental channels. So you see that CPAs generally are climbing across the board. That being said, a lot of our bigger brands do still have really strong ROAS. What's interesting is that the $5 to $15 million brands are consistently showing the lowest ROAS across all the years, 2023 to 2025. So one possible explanation for that is that brands that maybe should just be spending in the $5 million range can try and scale a bit too fast. And, maybe they're focusing more on scaling as opposed to actually efficiently scaling. And so their ROAS can definitely fall off in this section. Whereas the bigger brands, once they're starting to spend the 15, 35 plus, they are much more worried about both advertising and growth, but also doing it in an efficient manner.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, Dylan. I think, if I had to guess, what we're seeing here is that $5 to $15 million range, you're sort of capturing those brands that are in transition, right? They're in transition from being a very small, rapidly growing brand that doesn't need to spend a lot. They haven't really yet hit diminishing returns in their campaigns. And suddenly they're pushing up against those ceilings. They're feeling a bit of CPA and ROAS resistance in the channels that have worked with them so far. And they need to find those next sources of growth. So they need to find which channels do I need to invest in next to get up to the next level. How am I going to build my brand so that I'm not just reliant on the quality of my product and so on and so forth. So really interesting to see that reflected in, I think, that second band there. Teja, are there anecdotally any trends that you've seen in terms of how brands are able to scale and retain efficiency as they increase their media budgets?
I mean, retaining and scaling efficiency is, the name of the game for every brand. I think the most important part there is about what tools you leverage to get that scale. I think a really common one that we've seen at Rockerbox, especially for brands who are going from that $5 million range to that $10 to $15 million range, is using incrementality testing to place those large bets, right? Trying to figure out if CTV/YouTube CTV is the next channel for them, or figuring out if they should continue to spend on branded search as much as they have been today to identify, are there any budget savings that I can use? And then once they get past that initial phase of being confident in what channels to scale in, the next step for them is always to leverage something like an MMM alongside MTA and incrementality testing to set budgets on either a quarterly or monthly basis, which helps them scale beyond that $15 million range to that $35 million, especially as they bring in more and more revenue year over year.
Yeah, that's all great advice. I mean, certainly the bigger your brand, the more revenue you get, the bigger your budgets, the more problems and the more challenges you have. None of these problems go away or get easier as you scale, unfortunately. And then very similar sort of slide, very similar patterns, but this time instead of by the size of the advertiser, the size of the brand, we're looking instead by industry. And Dylan, I don't know if there are any elements that you want to call out here specifically, but yeah, just let us know.
I don't think there's anything super specific. I think what is interesting is that each industry is showing very different results. So you can see cosmetics and beauty, we're seeing CPA slightly decline and ROAS go up at the same time. Whereas when we look at something more like home goods, we are seeing that actually the CPAs, they're going up pretty substantially. And that the ROAS is also going down, not quite as substantially, but it's still going down. So this just goes to show that each industry is performing very differently at these times.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, it's just a reminder, I think, that every brand is pretty unique. You know, we're all unique to the industries that we operate in. And there's no sense in looking at a completely different brand in a different industry and saying, well, they're getting a better ROAS than me. I wish I was there. I think it's really important to think hard about what you treat as a benchmark for your own business and how you think about success in different channels. Erica, another question from you. Oh, I love this question. Have you seen large changes in attribution and benchmarks post-tariffs? We absolutely have seen the impact of tariffs, yes. So certainly the main thing is we have just seen a little bit of, I would say, demand suppression across the board. So just lower demand for a lot of products that are subject to big tariffs. Obviously, this varies tremendously by company, right? So some companies are much more subject to tariffs than others. Those ones are certainly seeing the bigger impacts. And I would say that we're seeing it the most in terms of brands that have a quite high AOV. So the bigger the ticket price, typically what we've seen is those consumer journeys getting longer. So it takes customers a lot longer to make the decision. And we're seeing it, to your point about click journeys, we are seeing it even in the sort of more upper funnel type of indicators. So not only are you seeing the impact down on the actual purchase, but even the kind of leads and site sessions and things like that seem to have taken an impact. So just the fact that new sticker price is there impacts every aspect of the customer journey. But like I said, it's definitely more of an impact for the brands that have had those bigger price changes, the brands that are impacted more by tariffs, and the ones that have those higher ticket prices. So Tasia, Dylan, I don't know if you've got any other specific points to add on that tariffs point.
Yeah, adding on to that longer customer journeys part, Erica, that actually specifically affects attribution because now there's longer paths to conversion, more touch points, each receiving different numbers of credit, which kind of obfuscates like which channels are the most incremental, right? If previously, let's say a $500 purchase took your client or took your customers about like 5 touch points to get to, but now it takes, like 5 retargeting touch points alone alongside other touch points, it's hard for brands to understand which of those touch points truly drove the next step in the customer journey, which is where, let's say, path to conversion analysis alone makes it a little bit harder to figure out which spend is truly driving the next step in the customer journey, which is, again, where we really recommend point-in-time incrementality testing to determine something like, hey, do I really need to be spending this much on display to retarget this customer like 4 times?
Yeah, we've also seen some success with our media mix modeling product in being able to understand the impact of tariffs because we're able to include price changes as a feature in the model. So we're not just including features in the models to do with how much you're spending in each channel on a daily basis, but we can also add additional features that say, well, we increase prices on this date, we increase prices again on this date, and we can see the impact of that downwards on revenue and downwards on conversion for the brands that we build models for. So it's very interesting to be able to actually quantify that. Obviously, that's very useful information for a marketer to be able to say, I can tell exactly how much less demand I'm getting because I had to increase prices. So a few different ways to think about that problem. But Erica, thank you for the question. Yeah, that was a really good call out. That is all we have in terms of slides. So if anyone has any further questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Otherwise, I think we're going to be able to end this session a little bit early. We'll give it 30 seconds for anyone who has a question to drop it in. And while we're waiting, just in case, I would like to thank my 2 colleagues on the webinar here. Tasia, thank you very much for your time and your insight. It's very, very helpful to have someone who's so close to so many big advertisers here to talk about what he's seen during the course of 2025. And Dylan was responsible for a lot of the analysis that underpinned these trend slides. So thank you for attending, and thank you also for your hard work on all of this. I'm not seeing any further questions pop up, so I think we can wrap it up there and say goodbye. Thank you everyone who came, and hope to see you on the next webinar next month.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.